Hello and welcome to The Bottom Line on TVP World. This is where we unpack some of the main business and economic stories of the day. I'm your host, Marie Cato. Poland's seaside resort town of Sopot will hold this year's European Financial Congress in early June. The initiative, which is an independent think tank, aims to develop and highlight current economic and financial issues through panel discussions, debates and research. One of the topics, foreign capital inflows versus the quality of governance. Let's look at Jan Kennedy's report.
Over the past 2 decades, Central and Eastern European countries have undergone a historic transformation, driven by their accession to the EU. But becoming a European Union member and reaping the benefits stemming from the status required candidate countries to meet a wide range of criteria, including implementing reforms to ensure good governance.
Trust in
the government, trust that things are being managed appropriately, that the affairs of the state are being handled in a reasonable way, that institutions are properly organized. This is really a key element of the investment process. And economic investments, well, that's what truly drives the economy, because both the act of investing itself and the outcomes of the work stemming from those investments are crucial for economic development.
The transformation in investor confidence was most clearly demonstrated by the surge in foreign direct investment, as institutional and legal barriers fell. Poland, the region's largest economy, was the primary beneficiary, attracting $214 billion in FDI between 2003 and 2022. The Czech Republic followed with $157 billion, while Slovakia and Hungary attracted $56 and $36 billion respectively. Analysts say the main driver behind the post-accession success of CE countries has been the alignment of their legal environment with EU requirements.
This made doing business much easier and greatly improved standardization. It also showed our international partners that we adhere to the same strict regulations as older EU members. This helped build trust, encouraged trade in our goods and services, and accelerated our success.
While experts agree that Poland's success cannot be attributed to a single factor, a sound macroeconomic policy, particularly in monetary management, has played a crucial role.
For a long time, Poland was seen as a model by other countries. We were constrained in how much we could borrow, and our budget deficit was subject to strict rules. This reassured many foreign investors who were wary of entering the region, making Poland a more attractive option compared to countries without such discipline.
Improved governance was reflected in the Transparency International's Corruption Perceptions Index. Since joining the EU, Poland and the Czech Republic, which have attracted the most foreign investment in the region, have seen the biggest drop in perceived corruption. In contrast, Slovakia, which occupies the same position in the CPI ranking as 2 decades ago, as well as Hungary, which dropped 40 positions in the ranks, still reported an average annual increase in foreign investment of 5% and 4% respectively since 2003.
So the interplay between the quality of governance and the amount of foreign capital a country can attract is the focus of one of the essays that forms a publication under the auspices of Lech Wałęsa, the former president of Poland, called Profit and Principles When Global Finance Meets Democratic Values. And this publication will be published by the European Financial Congress. And today we get a little bit of a sneak peek, and we are joined by the author of this piece, Professor Charles Goodhart, economist and author of Goodhart's Law and emeritus professor of Banking and Finance with the Financial Markets Group at the London School of Economics. Hello, and thank you very much for joining us today.
Good afternoon. I'm glad to be with you.
So you are one of the co-authors of this publication that will be showcased under the auspices of Poland's former president, Lech Wałęsa, at the June European Financial Congress. Tell us about the significance of this publication in the context of the upcoming European Financial Congress.
Well, I think it's extremely important that Poland and the countries of Eastern Europe can continue to get large-scale capital inflows to assist them in their dramatic improvement. The degree of difference between Eastern Europe and Western Europe has narrowed really dramatically in the last 15 years or so. Nowadays, Warsaw is just about as prosperous as London.
And tell us about the significance of the angle that you are covering in the publication, good governance in the context of securing and boosting global capital flows.
Well, I fear that we're actually seeing an example of not very good governance at the moment in the United States, because that is going to raise uncertainty everywhere. And if people don't know what the structure of the economic system is going to be, they're going to stop investing, and they're going to stop investing everywhere. And the problem with what President Trump is doing is not just that he's raising tariffs, but that he's changing his mind, and things are changing sort of every few days. And that means that you don't know where you stand. And if you don't know where you stand, you keep still.
The flow of capital into Poland is very high on the agenda of the Polish government, so boosting investment and ensuring that it hits a steady and robust level. How would you assess the level of capital flow into Poland at this moment in time?
Well, I'm not an expert on the Polish data, and I don't think that I'm in a strong position to comment on that particular question. What I would say is that I think that the world is going to and have to reorientate, and Europe is going to have to play a larger role than it has in the past, and a more unified role, and that Poland will have to play and will be playing a very large part in that process.
You suggest in your paper that the success of foreign capital investment is significantly bound to good governance in the host country, namely an incorrupt government is one of the main obstacles. Can we even say that something like that really exists, i.e. an incorrupt government? Can it ever exist?
It depends a bit on how you define corruption. I think that there are and have been and should be many governments where the individuals do not seek to enrich themselves inappropriately. On the other hand, I think it is very difficult for governments not to regard supporting those parts of the system which they feel to be most beneficial with acts of policy. Now, I don't know whether you could call that corruption to support those bits that you like or not. I don't think that I would. If I define corruption narrowly, I think that I would say that many governments are not corrupt. It's only if you define corruption very widely that I think that you would argue that most governments, or virtually all governments, have a degree of corruption.
In the context of your paper, could you give us some examples of the countries that you would perhaps broadly define, according to that broad definition of corruption, that you would consider to be incorrupt?
I don't think that my own country, the United Kingdom, has faced significant corruption, certainly not of the narrow kind. I think that indeed most European countries are relatively free of corruption. And corruption is, I think, much more sort of concern than, in many cases, a reality. It is something that everyone fears, and I think that there is a tendency for some parts of the social media to exaggerate the degree of corruption in countries.
How would you assess the Central and Eastern European region in terms of effective, fair and incorrupt government, especially after over two decades of being in the EU? And obviously Hungary is also an interesting case study here.
Indeed, you are quite right. Hungary is an interesting case. But I think that you have shown great and considerable improvement. And that you are now at a really very improved stage of being really pretty incorrupt.
And looking at the current Romanian political situation, some may perceive this as the beginning of some sort of political crisis. But what kind of impact do you think that this may have on the Romanian economy?
Very difficult to tell. And of course, the final election has not taken place at all yet. And there is a very considerable fear about the extent of involvement by other countries in the elections that take place. And there are those who see, for example, indications of Russian taking advantage of certain effects in the US elections, though I know nothing at all about that. There haven't been, I think, many clear evidence of foreign involvement in elections in my own country, but it is a worry that I think that people have quite widely.
But on the should we say, on the spectrum of the last 2 decades and this region, the Central and Eastern European region, as members of the EU, which countries would you say have adapted best to your standard of effective, fair and incorrupt governance?
Well, I'm not a political scientist. I'm an economist, and
So, from that economic point of view, shall we say? Let's look at it from that angle.
Well, from an economic point of view, Poland has done outstandingly well, and the Baltic states have done extremely well. The Czech Republic has done well, and I would also add, I think that, although it's not frequently mentioned, that Bulgaria has done really quite well as well.
Do you think that a potential economic crisis, this political crisis that could potentially lead to, let's say, an economic crisis or a further economic crisis, do you think that it could potentially erode all that they have worked towards in the last 2 decades?
There is a great concern that the American policies will lead to a significant slowdown around the world. The rate of growth of the Western economy, of Western Europe, is already, and the UK, is already depressingly low, and is quite likely to continue, and a setback of the kind that is likely over the next few years is far from welcome. It's highly unfortunate. The only sort of comfort, the only silver lining, is that the withdrawal of the United States, I think, provides an enormous initiative and need for Europe to coalesce and cooperate and unify to a much greater extent than it has in the past. If America withdraws, in order for the world to remain well-functioning and stable, Europe must take much more of the lead than it has in the past. And that, of course, involves Eastern Europe just as much as Western Europe.
And in terms of good governance, let's just go back to that for a little while. What do you think is the best way of implementing good governance standards? You suggest in your paper that some authoritarian regimes often implement positive change more effectively, which is an interesting statement.
One of the problems here is that the authoritarian regimes are much more likely to remain in power for much longer because they don't face elections. And that means that they're not so interested in very short-term results. And they're not concerned that much with short-term costs in the pursuit of longer-term benefits. So they have the advantage of being able to take a longer-term view than the more democratic countries in the West, where the political party in power is very concerned that it should not be in a position of losing support in the short term, because in the short term it may face elections and may lose out. That, for example, was one of the reasons for the introduction of independent central banks, to try and prevent political parties in democratic countries from manipulating interest rates for short-term advantage.
Just go back to Poland for a moment. Poland is very keen on attracting investment and developing the economy. You make an important point in your paper that the lender chooses their criteria in terms of the best returns on their investments, which I wonder whether surely there needs to be a sensible balance that benefits both sides to lead to optimal results. So what do you think? What sort of balance criteria should be sought after?
Well, with FDI, with direct and foreign direct investment, there's bound to be a balance, because the investor won't put their money in unless they expect a return. And the FDI will lead to increased investment, productivity and employment in the recipient country. And it's a win-win for both sides. And again, one of the problems of the recent developments in the United States is that the uncertainty that this is engendering is going to make it so difficult to work out what the benefits of foreign direct investment may be, because you don't know what the structure is going to be, that it's likely to decline in the short run.
And just as we wrap up, you are also the author of Goodhart's Law. Can you tell us about the main principles of it and perhaps how it fits into returns on investment?
Well, it's a fairly simple point, which is that once you make a measure into a target, it's to the advantage of everybody to manipulate conditions in such a way that the target is reached in a way that means that the relationship of the measure ceases to hold because it's been manipulated. I don't actually think that this has particularly relevance to the issues relating to foreign direct investment and the economic growth of Poland. I'm very glad to say that my law doesn't affect everything. It would be rather awful if it did.
Okay. Professor Charles Goodhart, economist and author of Goodhart's Law and emeritus professor of banking and finance with the Financial Markets Group at the London School of Economics. Thank you very much for joining us, and we hope to welcome you in Poland next month.
Thank you. Goodbye.
And that concludes The Bottom Line today. I was your host, Marie Cato. We're on every weekday at 5:10 CET on TVP World. In the meantime, for the latest in regional business, follow us on X and on tvpworld.com. And for more news and analysis, stay with us on TVP World. Goodbye.